Good afternoon. I'm John Coffey, who until my retirement earlier this year was curator of American and modern art, and most meaningfully for me, curator of Judaic art. I am here in place of Director Valerie Hillings, who is unfortunately unable to be with us today, but she has asked me to read the following introduction. I welcome you to the 20th annual Abram and Frances Pascher Kanof lecture. We are delighted to resume this popular program, made possible, as always, by an endowment established by the Kanof daughters, Liz and Margot, and Liz's husband, Ron Levine. My thanks to them for this enduring testament to their parents. I wanted so much to be with you today, but as many of you know, last Sunday I lost my mother. I asked my friend John Coffey to read my words so that I could express my appreciation of the sense of community and love of family that defines the Judaic Art Gallery and has been extended by so many of you to my mom, dad, and me. This year's lecture has a special resonance for me as it recalls the memory of two very special friends of the North Carolina Museum of Art, Doctors Abram Kanof and Frances Pascher Kanof, who, like my own parents, came to North Carolina to be with their daughter and her family. Thanks to Abe Kanof's commitment and passionate work, our Judaic Art Gallery has become a distinguished and distinctive part of our collection, which celebrates the ceremonies of Judaism, recognizes and honors generations through the centuries, and provides insight into shared experiences and beliefs around the world. As we announced on Thursday, we are in the process of reimagining how we present our collections. A full reinstallation of our galleries, due to be complete in October 2022, will focus on connections across place and time and thematic and interpretive galleries. This transformative reinstallation expands upon our commitment to welcome visitors from around the state, the country, and the world into a museum that works to transparently capture our shared histories and pushes forward to interrupt preconceptions of how art should be presented. Today, consulting curator of Judaic art, Gabriel Goldstein, together with other members of the NCMA staff, will offer insight into our aspirations for the Judaic art collection, gallery, and programming. Next year, the gallery will move to a more prominent location near the front of the West Building, reflecting the centrality of the Judaic art collection within the People's Collection. We will offer exciting new interpretive elements and continue to enrich our holdings and the narratives we tell through acquisitions and loans. We will celebrate points of commonality and transcultural connections while highlighting unique stories. I'm so proud that we are a national leader in collecting and exhibiting Jewish ceremonial art, and I look forward to continuing to enhance our profile and invite visitors from North Carolina and beyond to experience the truly remarkable Judaic Art Gallery at the North Carolina Museum of Art. Now, before I turn things over to my friend and longtime colleague, Gabriel Goldstein, let me give you a brief background. A native of Toronto, Gabe holds undergraduate and graduate degrees in multiple disciplines: art history, decorative arts, design history, and material culture. He worked at Yeshiva University Museum in New York for over 20 years in curatorial and senior leadership roles. Previously, he worked at the Jewish Museum in New York and the Royal Ontario Museum. He is currently an independent curator, museum consultant, and adjunct professor working with institutions in the US and Israel. Gabe is the founder and director of Reimagining Jewish Education Through Art, an aesthetic education project integrating visual arts experiences with traditional text study. But most pertinent for us, Gabe has been a consulting curator for the Judaic Art Gallery since 2002. When I first assumed oversight of the Judaic Art Gallery after Abe Kanof's death, I knew I needed help. I needed a lot of help. And I asked around to all of the leading curators and scholars in the field throughout the country. And the one name that kept coming up was Gabe Goldstein. And we first brought him down to assess the collection as it was in 2001. And he did a very detailed report and a plan for the development of the collection. And it was so impressive that we kept him on a contract basis for nearly 20 years. He has been he's been the one that I've always gone to when we are seeking acquisitions and developing interpretive programs for the gallery. There hasn't been a single acquisition we've made that Gabe hasn't vetted. I learned enormously from him, and he has really given this museum and the Judaic Art Gallery an extraordinary commitment of his time and I'd have to say love. And I'm pleased beyond measure that he agreed to continue on after my retirement as the lead curator on a consulting basis, but still the lead curator of the Judaic Art Gallery for the next few years. And so it's my honor to introduce Gabe Goldstein live from his apartment in New York.
Good afternoon. John, thank you for those very kind words. And I know we all send our condolences and sympathy to Valerie and her family. And I was very touched when Valerie mentioned how, just like the Kanofs, her parents joined her in Raleigh following their daughter. And I think that idea of family and generation and memory, something that this gallery really evokes. And John, your words are heartfelt, and I appreciate that. And we all appreciate that as we move forward, you're continuing to be active despite your retirement with the Judaic Art Gallery and our collection and the future of this very important effort. Today, we have an opportunity to discuss and really to celebrate the history of this collection from the Kanof's founding of this effort and how we are now stepping forward in 21, 22, into a new era for the museum and for the Judaic Art Gallery within the NCMA overall definition, and in that way in a definition for the nation and the globe. Because as you have heard, the Judaic Art Gallery is moving on up. We're moving into a more prominent location adjacent to or really embedded in the suite of European galleries. And the Judaic Art Gallery and its collection is firmly attached to the heritage of Europe, both Ashkenazic, Franco-German, and Sephardic, Iberian origin, but it is a global collection, really from Asia and Africa, as well as Europe, and from the Americas. And in that way, it shows, just like the European galleries, how all our ideas connect globally, universally, ideas of faith, history, tradition, and most importantly for the NCMA of art and beauty, and how art and beauty reflect that heritage. Also, for a new reinstallation in this very moment, the storyline of the Judaic Art Gallery and the storyline of the NCMA is going to embrace a greater story of diversity, of tolerance, and of connection. And the Judaic Art Gallery is part of that broader storyline of history and heritage, connections between faith communities, between geographic communities, and beyond. And in 21 and 22, naturally, just like this moment, as I'm broadcasting from our dining room in New York City, we are a global village and a technologically advanced culture and life. And all of us live in new technological ways that we all seemed absolutely impossible when I first started over 15 years ago with NCMA, and certainly which seemed impossible to Abe and Francis Kanof when they were imagining this collection and imagining the world. So we're going to explore how the gallery will have new storylines, new acquisitions, and what we know about them, and how we will show a more diverse and tolerant life, but also use new technologies to expand the interpretation, the messaging, and the reach of this gallery and the reach of the museum in new ways, just like we're doing at this very moment on Zoom. And I just saw we have somebody present from Paris, as well as a large crowd from the Triangle and beyond. So really, we are reaching globally in so many ways. I'm very excited that today's presentation will feature 3 members of the NCMA team beyond myself, who will show us different aspects of how the gallery is being reimagined, how we're moving forward, and its context within the larger museum and within the larger story of the history of art, of history, memory, and faith. So I'm very happy that we will have presentations in this order by Catherine Briggs, who is the senior exhibition designer at NCMA and who is the prime designer for the Judaic Art Gallery. Following Catherine, we'll hear from Felicia Ingram, who is the newly hired manager of interpretation, accessibility, and diversity at the North Carolina Museum of Art. And Felicia will discuss the new digital approaches to interpretation, which will enhance the storytelling and the experience of the Judaic Art Gallery, and how that will be parallel and connected to experiences with new interpretive tools across the museum. Following Felicia, we have a presentation by Moses T. Alexander Greene. Some of you may remember him from our Freedom Seder in April, and he will discuss that. Moses is the director of performing art and film at the NCMA, and his programming that he helps to usher in and lead is one of the ways that the Judaic Art Gallery and these themes reach out in new ways to various communities, to diverse communities, and provide new connections between the Judaic Art Gallery and a broader story of life in North Carolina and beyond, today, in history, and in the future. Catherine and Felicia will be here with us from the North Carolina Museum of Art live. I too am live, as you heard, from Manhattan. Moses unfortunately could not be with us today, but live, but as we used to say, he's here on Memorex. So Moses will be presenting a pre-recorded discussion. I will follow that with a presentation and discussion of some of the new acquisitions, as well as some of the objects you may remember from before that will be featured in the new Judaic Art Gallery when we move forward to our new location and an expanded presentation and interpretation. And in that conversation and presentation, I hope to share with you the stories behind these new acquisitions, the process and presence of our research and discovery, and let you in on some of the secrets, because sometimes when you read an exhibition or gallery label, you just have one word or two, which tells you what you might need to know. But I want you to understand how we came to those discoveries and what those discoveries tell us about the potential of this gallery. So thank you for joining us. I feel greatly privileged to work with the NCMA. I think John's idea of love is accurate. I really feel that we are pioneers, that we know that Abe and Francis Kanof were truly the pioneers of this collection, but the NCMA has become the pioneer in understanding, collecting, presenting, and preserving works of Judaic art within a mainstream art context, and something which is really important for the history of art, for our state, for our nation, and really for our globe. So with that, I would like to welcome first Catherine, then Felicia, and then Moses, and then I will be back soon.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the Judaic Art Gallery here at the North Carolina Museum of Art. Today, we're going to talk about not only what we have now, which is wonderful, we're going to talk about how it's going to be reimagined and taken towards the front of the building so that it has a more prominent place embedded in the European galleries. And with that, tell a broader story of what's going on. As we enter the gallery, as it is now, basically facing a wall. It's not a bad wall. But in its new location, I'm going to have Luke find his sweet spot over here. You'll basically be able to see the entire run of the gallery. You'll have a great sight line from the classical court as you just find your way through European and to our new installation. With that sight line, you'll be able to appreciate the first room, which is, it has evolved over the years. It's become basically a place to celebrate new acquisitions, special things that have come to us from John, from Gabe, from so many people. It's also an opportunity to thank our donors who we couldn't do it without. And as we move into the second room of the gallery, you come into home life. And with that, we have all the things that people have in their home and use to practice. And you've got Hanukkah lamps, you've got Sabbath, you've got Rosh Hashanah. In this area, we're working to add those digital elements that Gabe referred to. It's a very, very cool idea, and I'm hoping that it will work really well. And it's going to let you not only identify an object, but it's going to let you dig a little bit deeper into the history of it. And I'm going to let Felicia tell you more about that. There's going to be similar groupings to what we have now. And there's going to be some new objects that have come to us. And I'm going to let Gabe inform you all about that. One of the new things we have going on is we've completed the set of the Tutnauer Havdalah set. And it's always a good time when we can have the entire set together. As we make our way around the gallery, I believe we're going to have a new Esther scroll in this case. Again, I'm going to let Gabe give you the details on the individual objects. Moving into life in the synagogue. Maria, if I could get you to go to the slide of the case, please. One thing that we're very excited about is we've been planning for years to complete the ensemble of the Sari Shrulovich Torah, and we have all the parts for it, and we've been trying to assemble it since about March of 2019. Obviously, that slowed things down a little bit globally, and we're really happy to be able to have a new glass Balhan case, which is one of the hallmarks of the collection, is these marvelous cases. But we'll have the completed ensemble. We have here the shield, we'll have the crown, the pointer, and new mantles are being made. So it's going to be, at long last, come to fruition. We've been waiting a long time for this. Another one of the digital labels will probably be back in this space to give more information about the Torah Cases, the Torah Shields, the European ensembles. And I don't think I'm mistaken. I think this week we will be changing the mantles on the Torahs here. We have a full set for the Jewish holidays. I believe we're going from gold to, don't quote me on it, they might be purple. But it's one of the really cool things that these glass Balhan cases can do is this whole front slides open on just super heavy duty wheels, and we're able to get into the case fairly easily. and do rotations as needed and as wanted. As we make our way around, you'll see even in the current installation, we have sightlines into European. I think what's going to be very interesting about the new location is that on the one side, we'll have the Italian Renaissance and certainly portable altarpieces in a more European tradition. And those certainly connect everyone taking a piece of their religion on the road with them. And as we loop back around, we have a case full of items for Passover. What's really great about this collection is not only are they works that are from antiquity, but we also have modern things that show the continuation. I'm going to let you enjoy Luke's filming right now. These are two of the cases that will have the digital labels, and you'll be able to dig deeper into each of the objects. And as we worked our way around the gallery, you'll notice there's an iPad out front with some video on it. I'm imagining that that will be folded into the new digital format. And again, I'll let Felicia speak more about that. So we're all fairly excited about the new installation. And I have to say, when I first came to the art museums about 13 years ago now, I guess, I was in the elevator, in the staff elevator, and this man got on the elevator, and come to find out it was John Coffey. And he says, "Oh, you must be new." And I was like, "Wait, I recognize your voice from public radio." And it was John Coffey. And as the elevator doors opened, he literally took my shirt and pulled on it and said, "Come on, the rabbi's here. They're blessing the gallery." Okay. So that's how I came to meet John in the Judaic Art Gallery. And I've been working on it ever since, and I'm super excited to reinstall it. Thanks for having me.
Hi there, my name is Felicia Ingram. I am the manager of interpretation, accessibility, and diversity here at the museum. First, I'm going to start off kind of describing what I do because my title is a little bit of a mouthful. A big part of my role is kind of these two components. A big one that we've really been talking about today is the interpretation of the gallery. Interpretation can mean a lot of different things in a lot of different organizations. So for our museum and the art museum, interpretation is really about storytelling, as Gabe kind of noted to, right? Using digital technology, scavenger hunts, digital interactives, immersive media to bring the objects and the stories that the objects are telling to life. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today, specifically for the Judaic collection. And then the other half of my job really is that accessibility and diversity. And so I'm always trying to make the collection more accessible to people with disabilities, but also to everyone, right? A 5-year-old may not appreciate an object like a 55-year-old or like a PhD educated curator will. So I'm really trying to connect all of our audiences and make the objects and the text and the information in the galleries accessible for everyone. So we've all, Gabe, Catherine, everyone has been noting these digital labels that are coming into the gallery. So they're going to come into this space, as again was mentioned, connected specifically to cases in this space. And the idea of the digital label has a few different components, a few different layers. Right, so of course it'll have the text that normally goes with the objects, but it will also eliminate these wall panels to my left and to my right. So instead of having the cards like we've had in the past, the digital labels will house that text. In addition to, of course, we're going to have these beautiful high resolution of the objects. So of course, I think the object is pristine. The cases are fantastic. But what the technology allows, especially for those that might be visually impaired, that really close up, that beautiful zooming and that exploration of the object on the kiosk, right? So you'll be able to see it in person, you'll see the scale, you'll see the size, and then you can use the technology to really dive into that crisp, beautiful imaging of the different objects in the cases. So there's that component. And then again, I'll talk about storytelling, right? All of these cases are related to some kind of a story, right? We have Hanukkah to my left, we have Passover to my right. And so I want to highlight these beautiful holidays and this beautiful culture within the objects, right? And the stories that these objects are trying to tell within the Judaic culture. In addition, as we've also been hinting at, the connection between the rest of the collection, right? So the gallery will now be centered or integrated within the European collection, right? So the iPads, or excuse me, the digital labels will be able to highlight the other collections around it and the story that the culture plays within Europe and within the time period that we're talking about as a whole. And then finally, I think the other thing that's really important for me that I try to do throughout all the galleries that I think comes off well is this idea of relevance, right? We have objects, some of them are newer, some of them are older. How can we create relevance? And for this gallery, there are so many meal related items. You have plates, you have different serving utensils, right? So bringing that back to food and celebration. And that's another thing that's connected to the other galleries as well. There's this big theme of food, wine is another one, especially for our classical and Egyptian collection, right? So I'm hoping to tap into some of that food relevance. We had discussed possibly doing food recipes related to the different collections in here and creating that relevance and that connection for everyone. The other piece that I hope these digital labels will host are what I would like to call educational games, right? So one of the objects here, a lot of this is still a little up in the air. We're still kind of in the planning process, but it has beautiful animals and beautiful symbolism. It is alone. Many of the objects in our collection also have those animals and that symbolism. So again, for those younger visitors, why are these animals important? Why are they featured in this object? And so really highlighting some of the details in the different objects throughout the cases using these educational gamification, right? So they're able to look at the object in the case and they'll able to learn more on the digital label. And the digital label is not meant at all to replace the objects. It's not meant to foreshadow them at all or oversight. It's meant to enhance the viewing of the object. It's meant to add more context, more education, more relevance. And again, that idea of this storytelling. And so in regards to accessibility, these will also be bilingual. So we will have the option, we're going to integrate many of these throughout the galleries to have that bilingual, that Spanish translation within the galleries, within the digital labels as well. So that'll be a big part of it. And I'm really excited. I think it is something new that we're doing. It's something new that we're kind of integrating. And then of course, Catherine had talked about the iPad that's currently here. So a lot of that video content will get integrated into the digital labels in the appropriate case. I'm really looking forward to it. It's going to be a learning curve, I think, for all of us. And a big part of interpretation is learning and growing from what we're learning, right? So it's a very iterative process. And so I recently did a big digital label field trip, if you will, to a bunch of other museums. I went to 6 museums in 4 days with our IT specialists doing research on these digital labels and how they use them and how we can effectively use them. And I've learned so much from them that I'm so excited to bring into the museum and really implement within the Judaic collection. I think that's it. So I think now I'm passing it over to pre-recorded Moses or Gabe. Gabe, you are muted.
Sorry, we just want to introduce again Moses T. Alexander Greene, the Director of Performing Arts and Film, here or there at the NCMA, North Carolina Museum of Art. And as I said, Moses' presentation has been pre-recorded.
Hi, I am Moses T. Alexander Greene, the Director of Performing Arts and Film here at the North Carolina Museum of Art. Welcome. I've got to say, when I was on my tour of this beautiful museum, when Catherine White and I got here, I said, Catherine, can I please pause? Because there was something special about this part of the museum. And when Catherine came to me months later and said, Moses, you should think about some programming for the Judaic Art Gallery, I had an idea a good friend, Steffi Rubin, had given to me years earlier called the Freedom Seder. And I've got to say that our April 2021 Freedom Seder was emblematic of how the Judaic Art Gallery and its collection is becoming increasingly integrated and a vital component of the life of the museum in all aspects. I also would say that we could see that in how programming and performance were highlighted through connections and possibilities that are anchored here in this museum. I see the potential for even more of that in the future. When I think of the Freedom Seder, I think of how the Judaic Art Gallery and its programs are especially important tools here in 2021 and beyond, particularly as we increasingly as a museum are becoming sensitive to belonging, diversity, and inclusion. And our programming is indicative of exploring the similarities of the human experience. And here in this gallery, as you know, there are shared histories of ritual, celebration, loss, of rebuilding, of persecution, exile, and resilience, and finally of triumph. It is my sincere hope that the viewers of our Freedom Seder experienced how the beauty and the faith, the heritage and the artistry of our collection, visually, musically, in literary and in multidisciplinary forms, could strengthen, could provoke, excite, and could commemorate the rich experience connected to this gallery. So let me talk about what I sense could be the power of the Judaic Art Gallery. As an individual, I think there's both individual and communal awareness in this space. I think that you can practice mindfulness, and this can be a space of contemplation and of empathy, of compassion. And it's my hope that our Freedom Seder expressed and reflected not just the Judaic experience, but the universality of the human experience. You know, through our Freedom Seder, we tried to demonstrate the parallels between Judaism and other faiths, especially Abrahamic Christianity, that would be Catholic and multiple Protestant denominations, Islam, and also the African diasporic or the African American experience in terms of slavery and bondage, liberty and hope. This Judaic Art Gallery holds world cultures in its collection. There are Jews across the globe, in Africa and Asia, the Americas, Europe, and there's a mixing of various local and transnational cultures. I get a chance to highlight through presentation, performance, and programs that universality. I would say that I am blessed that my team and I are gifted with the opportunity to bridge art, the material, and performance in multiple projects for the collections in our galleries with works of art. And this sacred space, the Judaic Art Gallery, is an important piece of this. Here are some examples of what our Freedom Seder provided.
250,000 people got killed in the first phase of the war. And my dad told us we will all have to pray that God tonight would deliver us like he delivered the Israelites, where he would skip over us.
I decided it was important for me to tell this story as one of the last witnesses of it.
This narrative provides inspiration for every generation.
My dad said, I need everybody to lay here and just pray. The rebels kept on shooting right outside. We stayed in the middle of the house and we started praying.
You know, having to escape, having to search for asylum.
And we have hope today because we have a God who is still raising up Moses.
We didn't know exactly where to go. And that even when we went to a boat crossing the Atlantic, we were supposed to go to one place, and then they decided they didn't want us to us, and we had to search for another place, and finally ended up in a refugee camp in Jamaica.
The deliverance of God's people from bondage in Egypt to true worship and the land that God had promised them.
People to whom this has happened are not really any different from us, even if they're, you know, they may speak in funny ways, and their skin color may differ, different religions, but they're really us.
Hi, we're Becca, Levi, and Leilani Grant from Atlanta, Georgia, and I am the granddaughter of Holocaust survivors. These are their great-grandchildren, and we are going to do the 4 questions in honor of Dora and Aaron Rosenblatt. Ready? Ma nishtana halayla hazeh mikol halelot, mikol halelot, shebecho halelot, anu ochlim hametzu matzah, hametzu matzah.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehecheyanu v'kiyamanu v'higiyanu lazman hazeh. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has granted us life and has sustained us and has brought us to this time. As I said, this prayer is sung in Jewish homes to sanctify every special occasion, to express gratitude for being granted the privilege of life and sustenance. Given this most unusual year, I'm sure each one of us is able to connect with the sentiment of this ancient Hebrew prayer, understanding all too well that nothing is guaranteed and that everything, especially life itself, is a precious gift.
So I'd like to thank our speakers for sharing with us their outlooks and their knowledge and really their vision for how this gallery and how the museum can be expanded, how it can do more in terms of design and understanding of the beauty of the objects in the Judaic Art Gallery, and how they connect to the beauty and the history and the story of objects and artworks throughout the museum's collection, but also how we can reach out to better understanding of the collection and its importance and its resonance through new digital tools, and understanding of ourselves and our commonalities and our shared hopes and our shared histories across communities. What I hope to do with you today is take you through a number of objects that will be in the new gallery. A couple of them you may recognize, or you may recognize them as being similar to ones you may have visited before in the North Carolina Museum of Art. And a number of them are new acquisitions. But I also want to invite you with me to understand how we learned more about them and what that means for the gallery and for all of us. The first piece I wanted to share with you is one that's already in the gallery and may look familiar to you. As you see, it's by an unknown craftsperson, and is a Torah Shield, a decoration for the Torah scroll that hangs on the front of the Torah. This is the same piece in 3 different views. The center view is the view you've seen it before in the gallery. The view on the left is that the central Decalogue, the 10 Commandments that you see on the piece, is actually a hinged Torah arc, and it opens up, and you see it open on the left, and it has within it one Torah scroll, a little miniature representation of a Torah scroll, created in silver and gilding. The second Torah scroll, which probably originally stood to the right, has been lost. Now on the other side, you see the back side, the flip side of this piece, and you can see it has opening areas in it, which may have initially held changing plaques to indicate the reading of the Torah. That's what Torah shields were first made to do, so that when you had more than one Torah scroll being used in the ritual service, for example, when you have Sabbath and the new moon, Rosh Chodesh, on the same day, you would know which Torah was being read for which section and which Torah was rolled to which piece of the 5 books of Moses, the first 5 books of the Bible. And that's how Torah scrolls functioned. But actually in this Torah shield, as you see in the front view, it actually has carnelians in most of the locations. And it also has those at the bottom of the columns flanking the 10 Commandments or the Torah ark. And it has above the Torah ark a very large and elaborate crown, half crown really, that's attached to the piece. And that seems to be, and that surmounts the Torah ark or Decalogue. But actually, and we'll go to the next slide, that's not what's behind that crown. And you see here, and I can move my cursor and you can see it, 2 holes that actually are screw holes that attach that large Torah, that large crown above the 10 Commandments and the kind of ornament above the 10 Commandments or the Torah ark, the mini Torah ark. And that actually contains a dedication. And it's a dedication of the donation of this Torah shield initially when it was first given. And with that donor recognition, I have to say, we too want to be sure to recognize and celebrate all of the many donors who have made these acquisitions possible. And that's so important today when we recognize Doctors Abe and Francis Kanof, who as the founders and the donors of so many wonderful pieces to the collection, set a pathway forward for the NCMA in terms of this collection, and a pathway forward to the wonderful donors who've supported so many of these great acquisitions, which we continue to find and purchase and enhance our collection. And for each of the pieces you will see from the NCMA collection, the donors are recognized in the description, and they're recognized really from our heart, because this whole effort would be impossible without the support of all these individuals who have dedicated these pieces to our collection. And just as these individual pieces have donor inscriptions, so do we recognize the donors who have made this possible for us to have this collection and to share it with the public. As you see in this carnelian with a gold inscription, many of the letters have flaked off over time. And I was able to recreate what I thought the inscription said. It's in Hebrew, as you can see, and it shows how a man named Menachem Mendel gave this piece initially in 1765. But many of the letters were missing, and we had to conjecture what we thought exactly it said. But we can do more in 2020, 2021, and beyond. And that is because particularly now the NCMA, as you saw, our enhanced staff for design, for interpretation, for public programs, but also an enhanced staff for conservation. And Corey Riley, the new objects conservator at the museum, was able to, using photographic technique and computer digitization, to enhance and recreate the full inscription and to build up the letters that were missing. And Corey doesn't read Hebrew, doesn't have Hebrew knowledge, but she could see where there were still remnants of letters and fill them in. And this is exactly the kind of process you might do in art conservation elsewhere in the collection, I think we all know about the recreation of the sculpture, that when completion of a sculpture, that's a famed new NCMA project, or missing parts of paintings that might be filled in, at least for research. And here we were able, actually, and I have to say, we weren't exactly correct here in our guessing of the inscription. And then we were able to understand that part of it was a memorial. And that's not something that we understood previously as we guessed the letters that were missing. So with new knowledge, with digital technology, and with great new staffing at NCMA, we're able to build a better knowledge of the objects we present, the objects we share, and their history. One of the most important new acquisitions is this circumcision set from Rome. And you see both pieces of the circumcision set. Above at the top, the knife, which is a folding knife, the blade folds in. And at the bottom, the circumcision shield, which is used to protect the babies and to draw out the foreskin for the circumcision. We were very eager to find an object that was a circumcision object that had the beauty and quality, and also that was truly authentic, because so many objects in the marketplace that are Brit Milah or ritual circumcision objects actually are spurious. There's a great demand for such objects, and the knives frequently are fabricated from other objects. They can have a true decorative antique handle, but they're not truly a circumcision object, and they've been doctored. Here we see the piece in its fitted case. The case, the fitting for it is a more modern construct, but the case itself is an 18th century tooled leather case, and it may be original. What's really interesting about this piece, is the elaborate inscription and dedication on the piece, and it's quite beautiful engraving and workmanship. And as you can see, we were able to recognize the craftsman and the exact year when it was made. But this was only possible because we have a network of incredible experts and connoisseurs. And those of you who've attended past Kanof lectures may recall Ubaldo Vitali, the famed silversmith and silver conservator originally from Rome, a 6th century Roman silversmith, and a MacArthur Genius Fellow. And much to our shock, we had known, and the piece had been recognized, to have a city mark from Rome, and it was recognized possibly for its year. But because it's such a small piece, it's only a handheld small knife, a folding knife. There wasn't much room to put silver marks on it. And what Ubaldo, with his great knowledge of Roman silversmiths and Roman marking, was able to tell us was that actually in the exact same spot, they've had two silver marks. First, the maker's mark of Alessandro Dorio, a wonderful famed 17th century, 18th century Italian silversmith, Roman silversmith. And then right over Doria's mark, they put the Italian Roman, distinctive Roman city mark. And Ubaldo couldn't decide if it was the mark for 1751 or the mark for 1761. But he was able to tell us that it was Doria and the quality of the work. This piece has a very extensive inscription of biblical texts and rabbinic texts, and quite cryptic, but we were able to figure them out, acronyms for prayers recited in the Italian rite at the circumcision. And it bears a coat of arms, a family coat of arms or family crest, that as was frequently used by Italian Jewish families in the 17th and 18th century. And this family crest is actually the family crest of the Modigliani family, most famed for Amedeo Modigliani, a later descendant. But this belonged to a known Mohel, and he's identified in Hebrew and as well as in a Roman letter acronym. And you can see the piece in multiple views. It's just on flip sides. We're seeing two sides of the knife here and the Modigliani family crest. And here we see it with the shield with this extensive inscription. And on the other side, where we also have the Modigliani crest. What's interesting, in our very careful examination and in our examination with by Ubaldo Vitali directly in his studio atelier in New Jersey, where we shipped the piece for a very close examination, and where I was able to see the piece directly firsthand, was that there's actually, we can see that Abraham Modigliani was actually not the first owner of this piece. And beneath the family crest of the Modigliani family, with this bird and 3 stars, we can see slight remnants of an earlier family crest. We see an S-shaped tail, I imagine from a rampant lion, and someone else owned this piece and had it inscribed first. And then it was that inscription was erased. The piece must have been transferred into Abraham Modigliani's ownership, and he then customized the object. And this connoisseurship and study of objects very carefully exactly parallels the kind of study that happens elsewhere in the museum, particularly with paintings, where we can study using very close examination or X-ray or other techniques, the underdrawing, the previous editions and renditions of a painting, the pentimenti, as they are known, and understand a work of art across various layers and techniques. So we are very excited to have really a masterful Roman example of a circumcision set, a real rarity and a really prized object, which we'll be able to add to our collection. And we continue to examine and imagine, look for new techniques. Perhaps we'll have in the future even better digitized technology and photography to perhaps identify the earlier owner of this piece. This is another piece you may recognize from our collection, and that has been exhibited for a while. And we once again recognize the donors who helped us to purchase this piece and purchase all these pieces. And this is a wonderful Dutch Sabbath and festival lamp in very finely wrought silver, crafted workmanship in multiple pieces, multiple sections that are connected in very fine technique. And we're really proud of this piece in terms of its being an exemplar of the mastery of craftsmanship. And this is an example, a very fine example of the Judenstern type, the Jewish star, literally from the German term, which is a medieval star-shaped hanging lamp, which could accommodate multiple wicks with a reservoir, as you see here in the close-up, for oil. But then as that type grew out of fashion in secular use for lighting, it continued to be used in Jewish homes, particularly in Germanic lands, for Sabbath and festival lighting. And it became traditional in that type. Now, this is an example of a very elite, very expensive in its period, and very expensive even now, type of object in very fine silver craftsmanship. And as an art museum, we are looking for objects of exceptional quality. And so many objects across the museum are objects of elite culture, of objects created that were highly expensive in their time, demanded expensive patronage, either public patronage or private donation or private ownership. But we know that's not the whole story. And that's exceptionally important for us and something we really wanted to make sure that we could tell in the Judaic Art Gallery. So we were very excited to have this new recent acquisition, which will be exhibited for the first time in the reinstallation. And that is this piece. And you see it in the center in its full length. And it is a hanging Sabbath lamp or festival lamp in cast brass or copper alloy. And it is a very finely crafted object also, because craftsmanship, artistry, technique is central to what we show in an art museum and central to sculpture shown, cast sculpture in multiple techniques and approaches. This piece was very important to us because it does show in comparison to the previous piece, that these objects of artistry, of beauty, were available at multiple price points and for people at various economic strata. And that's particularly important in telling a history of Jewish objects, because if you only present Jewish objects made of finely crafted silver, Judaic ritual objects that are exceptionally expensive in their time and show an elite culture, that misrepresents the story of Jewish history and Jewish life. When Jews lived in many different economic situations, there were Jews with wealth, but there were many Jews who were less successful. And as we know, Jewish wealth is a trope frequently of anti-Semitism. And so in looking at a culture and in looking at a storyline of diversity and tolerance and trying to breed understanding and reaching across communities and to avoid conspiracy theories and to reach towards a fuller story, a more accurate story, it's particularly important that we had objects of quality and beauty that were objects crafted in base metal and showed that they were objects available at multiple price points for Jewish communities and Jewish individuals living across the spectrum of economic success. Now that's part of the story why we wanted this object so much. The other reason is the central figure, a full casted sculptural figure of an individual, of a Jew, who is seemingly of a Jew, who will be celebrating the Sabbath. And this is seemingly unusual to find a three-dimensional representation of a figure within a Jewish ceremonial art, but it's not unheard of, and it happens most frequently in objects for domestic use, in objects such as this for a Sabbath lamp, or Havdalah spice containers, or in, at times, Hanukkah lamps. And we don't usually find full figural 3D representation, though we can at times, within objects that were made for synagogue use, because there was a concern of graven images, a concern of what was an appropriate image that might be considered an object that could be venerated, an object which could be seen as idolatrous, as an idol. And so this object, who looks very much like a Jew of his moment in the 17th or 18th century, is actually a symbol, and as John Coffey had said, who you might think was a Protestant clergyman, especially holding his cane, or what you might even think was a bishop's rook, or used to because he was a shepherd of people. But it probably is based on similar dressed by Jews and by non-Jews in that period. And this bearded figure is very important. That storyline is also very important, especially as this gallery moves to a new location, because this storyline of forbidden imagery, allowed imagery, what might be seen a graven image or idolatrous, is something which is considered carefully within Judaism, but also considered very carefully and discussed in the Catholic culture, in the Counter-Reformation, and in the Reformation, and in the emergence of secular art in Protestant culture as a response to an idea of objects or imagery was idolatrous and should not be venerated within a church context. So when we discuss this with the galleries side by side, we see that. Also, we discuss here technology and lighting. And lighting is something we see across the museum, in our ancient galleries, in the Egyptian galleries, and in the Roman collections, and in the European collections, in church and domestic lighting techniques, as seen in the recent light exhibition as presented at the North Carolina Museum of Art, which included Judaic art objects, our Bezalel Hanukkah lamp. And what you're seeing on the far right is the Judenstern shape, the star-shaped multi-wick structure, and then these areas that allow for the oil when it burns or before to have a reservoir to fall down these channels and be collected in a smaller reservoir at the bottom. Now, one of the most exciting aspects of this acquisition, and this happened after we already purchased it and after it had been in a major collection, a major private collection in Israel for several decades. We knew aspects of its history. We researched its provenance and his previous ownership. But there is something we didn't know until Corey Riley, our wonderful object conservator, had a chance to examine it in the conservation lab. And she found for the first time that the piece is actually marked. And we were able to identify the craftsman, the artist who made this beautifully crafted and cast object. And to find with that, we took this mark, sent it to one of our colleagues who was a great expert on German metalwork and German Judaic metalwork, who was a museum professional in Munich. And we were able to pinpoint that the object was made by a particular maker. You see George Gerstner. And then we actually were able to get a relatively exact date based on this, because we know when Gerstner was active. So we learned much more. And that's only possible because of this great team of professionals we have working now at the NCMA to build a broader storyline of understanding of the objects, and then to build a better storyline of how we share those stories with the public, within our galleries, through digital media and beyond. Today, beyond by Zoom, and beyond in our programming, both live and in other modes. Here we see on the left our conservation lab, which now includes Corey Riley on staff full-time as an objects conservator. And you see Corey in green, I believe, beside John Coffey, looking at one of our other prized recent acquisitions, which has been on display in the gallery after it was conserved by Ubaldo Vitali. And here John Coffey is discussing it in the gallery, our Cotini 18th century Venetian Torah crown. Sometimes we're just lucky. And that's the case here with this beautiful new Ottoman Esther scroll encase. And you see the Esther scroll pulled out on the right, an Esther scroll, the Book of Esther, biblical story of Queen Esther, well known from the collection, both the Judaic Art Gallery and the painting collection at the NCMA. Now, this is an Ottoman case. We say probably Anatolia or an Anatolian craftsman who were specialists in filigree. And this just happened. We were recommended through our networks on a new auction house, a new dealer in objects, primarily jewelry and other precious objects in precious metal, with an online sale during the pandemic when people weren't as active in live sales, that was coming out of London. What was particularly interesting about this piece, beyond the really beautiful craftsmanship, was this, as you can see these details across the piece, they're basically just hundreds, schools of fish across the piece as a decorative motif on top of the filigree, on top of the fine wrought silver and then gilt wire. So why fish? Sort of surprising. And then what's interesting, fish have sort of a triple entendre, if I can say, and beyond. The first meaning of fish that you might immediately associate, you see it up here, perhaps most detailed in the top of this piece, is that Pisces is the astrological zodiac sign for the month of Adar, for the lunar month of Adar in the Hebrew 12-month calendrical system, or Adar, as some of you may know, is actually the month that is doubled when there's a leap year, a double month. So you have 13 months, 2 months of Adar in the Hebrew calendrical system. And from ancient times, there's been a correspondence between the 12 zodiac symbols and the 12 Hebrew months, as well known from ancient synagogue mosaics from the 4th to 6th century. So Pisces represents Adar and represents the month, but there's more. And as some of you may recall, those of you who heard me speak at our Zoom I Heart Purim program this past year, such wonderfully crafted, beautiful Esther scroll cases in the Ottoman Empire were frequently gifts from a new father-in-law, a potential father-in-law, to a new bridegroom. And as such, they were symbols of fertility, symbols of wishes for that family. And the fish, and as I pointed out, perhaps even the Esther scroll itself, in its parallel to the biblical text of Ahasuerus in English, the king's golden scepter. But fish are actually a symbol of fertility, of manifoldness, from a very well-known biblical text. And that text comes to us from Genesis. And that is a text which is the blessing recited initially to Ephraim and Moses from Jacob, from Israel, to Ephraim and Manasseh, and to Joseph. And that is the Hebrew phrase, vayidgu larov, that you should become teeming manifold. Vayidgu larov has in it the Hebrew word, that's how it's translated, as teeming manifold in many translations. But that's not exactly what it means. It means you should be, if you can say it, that you should go fish, that you should be a fish-like in your numerousness. And it's Hamalach hagoel oti mikol ra yivarech et hana'arim, a very well-known verse. V'yikra bahem shmi v'shem avatai Avraham v'Yitzhak v'yidgu larov b'kerav ha'aretz. And in English, this is from the New JPS translation. The angel who has redeemed me from all harm, bless the lads. In them may my name be recalled, and the names of my fathers, Abraham and Isaac. And may they be teeming multitudes upon the earth. But not really teeming multitudes, but you should be like fish. You should be plentiful like fish. So here we see a blessing of progeny, a blessing of a future built into this biblical connection. And our connections to biblical narrative, to biblical text, is one of the very important aspects of how the Judaic Art Gallery can reach out to multiple faith communities within North Carolina and beyond. I know that Abram Kanof delighted in presenting the Judaic Art Gallery and its collection to church groups who were familiar with the texts and with the heritage. And we continue to do that, as you saw Moses present his pastor and our storyline within the Freedom Seder and beyond. And I think for multiple communities and for multiple artworks in the galleries now, in the European galleries, immediately adjacent to us, it's this biblical storyline and very often very close biblical readings in the texts we have engraved and inscribed within our objects, on our objects, in dedicatory inscriptions, and here as we see in visual symbolism. And those visual metaphors are such an important part, particularly for an art museum collection. Those of you who know our gallery well know this piece, a highly minimalist, kinetic sculptural Hanukkah lamp. And this is a piece that was especially important to John Coffey, which he really loved, by a famed Israeli silversmith and artist, Zelig Siegel, who was active creating Judaica. And this piece, John initially encountered on the desk of, as a sculpture, Bertha Erdang, a famed Israeli and American gallerist, and one of the first gallerists to really promote Israeli art to a global audience. And John actually participated and wrote for the catalog in a last year's exhibition on Bertha Erdang at the Israel Museum. So we recall Bertha Erdang, we recall the art market, we recall our donors who recognize this piece, and we recognize a kinetic piece. And the way this works is the two pieces, and I'll use my fingers here, move across from when you first have here, you see on this, when you need to have 6 lights for the Hanukkah lamp with the additional shamash or servitor. And then when you need to get to 8, or the next night, you just push this a little bit. And this piece is really, I think, indicative of many of great 20th and 21st century pieces of Judaica that are really designed to be used and are kinetic. And in this example, we really are able to convey in the gallery how the piece is used, and the piece is designed for that use, and its artistry and concept multiply the use. But here we see Zelig Siegel as a minimalist 20th century artist, something else that connects to multiple works, late 20th century works, in the NCMA collection. But we were very excited that we were just able to acquire something very different by Zelig Siegel, a wonderfully designed and crafted hammered surface, quite large scale Torah crown that evokes, as explained by Zelig Siegel and by others, evokes the idea of Torah in the metaphor of water, in that Torah is often seen as living and vital, as a power of sustenance in a water imagery. And the Talmud is often in its depth and in its vastness referred to as a sea. So we see the waves and the action, and you see that in the detail. And you also see this wonderful hammered surface of the piece and how it reflects. It also reminds me very much that it's a very different approach for Zelig Siegel. And it basically, although it's a 20th century piece, circa exactly 2000, is a piece which could be described as Rococo. And I sort of feel like it's Marie Antoinette's wig come alive as a Torah crown with that curvaceous motion and action. And in that way, it relates to 18th century pieces and to Neo-Rococo and to the rebirth of ideas. But also, just like we saw in the previous piece, the Hanukkah lamp by Zelig Siegel, it's very practical. And I think that top knob on its stem is made to lift the Torah crown on and off easily when it would be used to decorate the Torah scroll and to be used within the synagogue. And I think that shape also reflects a connection to the text of the Torah, just as the water imagery does. And water imagery is very important, once again, as an activity and action, as it connects to so many other artworks across the collection. But that shape of a spindle, a thin line with a top, to me reflects also the decoration of the Hebrew letters in the Torah scrolls, known as the Tagim. And famously, as we know from this rabbinic storyline, that was something that Rabbi Akiva, the famed sage, was able to interpret to find new understandings. So I think the Torah scroll, the decoration of each letter in the scroll, is represented alongside this metaphor of water in this lively and beautiful crafted piece, which connects to a Judaic art tradition from back in history, really through the 20th century and beyond. We saw this piece as Catherine Briggs took us through the gallery currently to discuss how the gallery will look and be structured in the future. And this is Iris Tutnauer's wonderful Seder plate, which I actually discussed at the Freedom Seder, multi-layered piece, a piece that discusses multi-layers of history, multi-layers of usage, and I think which also evokes physically and in its structure, the actual matzah, particularly the kind of uneven shmura matzah. And Iris Tutnauer is a young Israeli craftsperson and a woman, and so many pieces in our historically silversmiths in particular were men. And here we see a new emergence of women artists, something we see across the museum, and particularly a women's involvement in ritual, in craftsmanship in metal, in new techniques, which often weren't welcome to Jewish craftsmen in times when the guilds were closed, and certainly weren't open to women who weren't seen to be the kind of artists who worked in such physically complex masculine motifs. And we see, I think, in this work, a particularly resonant and active work that evokes the moment it was made and a moment of history, and that notion that in every generation, we feel as if we were among those who left Egypt. So here we see one work by Iris Tutnauer, And then one more that's in our collection, this lovely piece that I think is based in some ways on a motif of a seed pod or some natural form for the spice container, the fragrant smelling object that is used within the separation ceremony of Havdalah to separate between the Sabbath at sundown at the end of the day on Saturday to enter into the week. But as we saw, and as Catherine pointed out, we now have the complete set. And we really can now see Iris Tutnauer's vision in complete context. How this one piece that's more organic, biomorphic, multi-layered, is compared to a highly modernist set of plate, cup, and candle holder, and contrasts. And that idea of providing a greater contrast is essential, a greater context is essential to the storyline of what we will be able to tell with greater context as the gallery moves within the European suite. Because the Judaic Art Gallery is now placed within a greater context, just like this one spice container is placed within a greater context of understanding, of comparison, of full artistic vision for this one artist. We are now placed within a greater context of full art history. And Judaic art is understood, something that NCMA really is a pioneer and champion. Abe Kanof was the pioneer in making this happen in North Carolina. And then each of us, each of the contributors, the donors, the scholars, the conservators, the interpreters, the digital technology experts are making for this broader context, whether we compare it to other works or whether we compare it to other storylines. Similarly, we saw Sari Strulovich's Torah Shield. And Sari told me recently that this piece for her, the Torah Shield, reflected how women frequently donated their own scarves to decorate a Torah case, a Torah teak. And those of you who have seen our Persian Torah teak in the gallery know that we have decorated it and shown it with that scarf decoration to show how it was used within the synagogue. And it's the connection of the personal to the communal. And in this case, just as I mentioned, Sari's a silversmith, but she's very interested in the connections between textiles and silver. And she works as a woman in what was frequently seen as a male prerogative, craftsmanship in metal, artistry in metal. But many of her objects, like this example, combine metal and textile together. Sari actually is preparing for a one-person show for the first time as part of the Jerusalem Biennale. And she showed me, I was recently fortunate to be in Jerusalem and to be with Sari. We were visiting my daughter and son-in-law over Sukkot. And I spent time with Sari, and she showed me some of her new works that combine textiles and ceramics and silver, as well as some earlier work she had made in these techniques, which are really a very unusual feature. And as we heard from Catherine, Sari was commissioned by the museum to present a full suite, a full ensemble for the Torah scroll. And so we could see Sari's complete vision for this object, something that's very rarely available, to understand how one artist envisions a complete Torah equipage, a complete Torah work. And that idea of seeing an object in a complete context is so important. And as I said, the idea of a broader context is something that we try to convey for many of the pieces throughout the galleries, for altarpieces, for works made for domestic settings, for works made as part of a Kunstkammer, but also for individual works to understand not just one individual object, but to have an opportunity for Sari to create a complete vision. So here we see her Torah crown. I think this is going to evoke clearly a slinky to many of us, but an active and evolving object, an object which is open and which bridges clearly across the two Torah staves. And though these pieces are both minimalist and modernist, but also very active and alive, something which really, I think, shows a 21st century approach, which breaks away from a pure, isolated, maybe crisp modernism to a more powerful and living and energetic, kinetic modernism. And with the Torah pointer and its connector, rod, chain, but in this case, a textile cord to attach the Torah pointer to the Torah staves when it is not in use. And as we said, we commissioned Sari to conceptualize and design a Torah mantle, which combines for Sari a vision in textile and in silver for these objects, for a complete contextual vision of a Torah scroll. We were able to also, with the support of our donors, commission these pieces and fabricate, and not just fabricate, but really to artistically create these wonderful Torah mantles to go with this new set and to present the complete set of a complete vision, an artist's vision for a dress Torah. And just as we have, as we mentioned, for our historic Torahs, dress Torahs in their 3 different period and geographic types, we are able to here have 3 different types and color schemes for the Torah, with on the far left, as envisioned by Sari, each of the systems and the color scopes is somewhat variegated, but the far left moves from a blue of a sky to a purer white, the type of Torah dress that is frequently used for the high holidays, for the days of awe, just as often in many communities, individuals dress in white as a symbol of purity for the days of awe. So here we see her sketch for the dress Torah and for each of the mantles. But this process, amazingly, and in terms of this global conversation we've entered into, is a global conversation from Jerusalem to North Carolina. And that is that we've involved artists, Neil Howard, a fiber artist and weaver, and Ruth Cox, a conservator and a Friends of the Judaic Art Gallery stalwart, in creating these pieces. And we see the raw silk at left, below in the middle as it's been dyed and then woven, and the fabric stretched out and prepared in Ruth's studio. And here we see Ruth, the construct, with the appropriate felt and conservation safe felt constructs underneath the silk. And then in our galleries, the preparation of the first dressed complete mantle. And here we see Sari at work as a metalsmith, and once again, her vision. And I think it's pretty amazing and telling that we are able to create a piece envisioned in Jerusalem, envisioned literally as we face towards Zion by a woman 21st century artist, and then crafted and created together in partnership with artists in North Carolina, something really distinct for the Judaic Art Gallery and our global vision. The last piece I want to discuss with you today is this new Hanukkah lamp that we purchased, not new, exactly from 1750, a beautiful German lamp, beautifully crafted, once again in base metal, in brass. And it was very important for us, once again, to find the highest caliber craftsmanship, but available at multiple price points across the periods and in multiple locations. And this piece, amazingly, has an inscription which tells us its owner, where he lived, and a date. So we know the owner, we know his name. His name was Eli or Eliyahu, Elijah, possibly, or just Eli Lipstadt. And he lived in a place that was initially identified when we were looking at this piece in an auction in Paris as coming from Butzbach, a town adjacent to Philadelphia. Sorry, adjacent, that was weird, adjacent to Frankfurt, Germany, with two kind of sub areas known as Niederweissel or as Hochweissel. And the inscription is only in Hebrew, so we have to kind of guess to transliterate it into a German location. And here we see the inscription. The inscription is the prayer recited immediately after lighting the candles on Hanukkah. And at the very bottom, his name, the place written in German, the German name, but of the location, and the year in Hebrew, the Hebrew date. But what was this place and who was he? So we networked a bit. First, we looked for parallels. This is actually the earliest we know dated Hanukkah lamp in the Israel Museum Jerusalem's collection from 1574 with the same type of inscription of the same prayer, also in brass, but cast, not sheet brass as in our example. And this comes from a man named Meir Halpern from 1573-4, particularly early. But we wanted to know who Eli Lippstadt might be or could be. So I networked with some experts in genealogy for German lands. They introduced me to a man who was an expert in this family locale, who lives in Florida. And lo and behold, he actually had a complete family tree from someone else that he was given privately in this family tree. And we recognize that there actually are two Eli Lippstadts in this period. We don't have exact proof for him, but we do have actually, we do have two surviving tombstones for two wives of his. He seems to have one wife who died earlier and then a second wife, both saying they were married to him. And then the family tree points out that he doesn't live in Hochweissel or Niederweissel, but actually lives in Wessel without the I in the German. And that's a town and a region adjacent to the Netherlands. And that makes a lot of sense because here we see on the left a German 17th century lamp from Hamburg, and his wives were buried in Hamburg. And on the right, a Dutch lamp from the 18th century from the Jewish Museum collection in New York. The left lamp, surprisingly, is from the Metropolitan Museum collection, and they purchased it in 1913. And basically, they bought almost no other Judaic items for 100 years. But it shows the type of finely crafted, very unusually wall-hanging lamps prevalent in Germany. Most lamps were what we call bench lamps, lamps that are freestanding. The lamp on the right is typical of a brass lamp that was frequently used in Holland. And what we have in our lamp is sort of a German and Dutch blend, which makes a lot of sense because it came right from that border. Now, we are just a couple weeks away from 3 weeks away from Hanukkah. So I wanted to close with a Hanukkah storyline, and particularly with this piece. I do want to point out that in the Metropolitan Museum's 150th anniversary exhibition in their last gallery, they pointed out how this, just in the past few years, as they've tried to be more diverse, they've included at their closing examples of their new Judaic art holdings. But as we know, NCMA has been way ahead of this, and we are the pioneer in the recognition of Judaic art in the context of art history, in the context of an art history museum. Now, this inscription is in Hebrew, Hanerot Halalu Anachnu Madlikim, known to some of you as the prayer that is recited immediately after kindling the lights. And the first Hanukkah night this year is on the Sunday night of Thanksgiving weekend. And we already just started the month, Kislev, of Hanukkah, where Hanukkah is celebrated. But this inscription says, and this prayer says, that these lights are sacred, but we do not have permission to use them, only to look at them. And that made me think about our wonderful collection and our wonderful gallery and the lessons we teach. Because the objects we have are sacred. The objects are sacred because of the stories they tell, because of the rituals they symbolize, because of the faith culture, because of survival and resilience, because of their connections across history. They're in the museum, they're behind glass. We don't have permission to use them, but we have permission to understand their sacredness. We do not have permission to use them. We have permission to look at them, to teach about them, to share their stories, to appreciate their beauty, and to understand. So I invite you to our new gallery in 22 to understand and share new stories and new understandings. Today we got new understandings of our objects and our gallery and its potential in this moment and beyond. And we are very excited for the future of our gallery, a future that's been made possible by our donors, a future that's been made possible because of the vision of Abram and Pascher Kanof. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much, Gabe. My name is Maria Lopez, and I'm the manager of film and lecture programs here at the North Carolina Museum of Art. Thank you for joining us this beautiful Sunday afternoon. Now I am going, if you have any questions or concerns or comments to share with our speakers, please share it in the chat or using the Q&A function. And let me see if we have any question. We have Ruth Cox saying, thank you so much, Gabe, and all for this fabulous presentation. Lots of thank yous. Robbie Weinman says an excellent presentation. So lots of good feedback. Bob says, Gabe, this is for you. Gabe is so informative and encouraging and supportive of staff, donors, and all. Thank you so much, everyone. If nobody has any questions, I think this concludes our lecture. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining. Thank you to John Coffey as well for his wonderful welcome and for reading Valerie's heartfelt statement. Thank you to Gabriel, of course, Gabriel Goldstein, for this insightful look into what's to come at the Judaic Art Gallery. And thank you to Felicia Ingram and Catherine Briggs for the walk through the gallery. And thank you to Moses T. Alexander Greene as well for pre-recording that wonderful message and sharing some clips with us of the Freedom Seder. And I think this concludes it. Gabe, do you have anything else to say? Any parting words?
Just thank you. It's been wonderful. I'm glad I could share my thoughts. And I look forward to the opportunity to come soon to North Carolina and to share this in person. And we're wishing everyone continued health and our thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Oh, yeah, we did get a question. I just saw a question come up from Connie saying, will there be a Freedom Seder in 2022? I've talked to Moses. It seems like he's planning on making this an annual thing. So I am hoping it is. Thank you very much, everyone.